From a man disappearing mid-step in front of multiple witnesses, to a woman driving straight into a warped version of her hometown, and a college student who woke up 700 miles from where he went missing with no memory of how he got there. These are disturbing cases of people who vanished and returned from another reality. Now, this first case is very, very strange. In 1880, a farmer named David Lang reportedly vanished into thin air while walking across a field on his property near Gallatin, Tennessee. There were multiple witnesses, including his wife, his 2 children, and 2 visitors arriving in a horse-drawn buggy. They said Lang was mid-step when he literally just disappeared. There was no flash of light, he hadn't fallen or gone behind a tree, he was there 1 second, and then he wasn't. The group ran to where he'd been standing, expecting to find a sinkhole or some kind of trap in the ground, but the earth was solid. They searched the area for days. Neighbors joined in, but no sign of Lang was ever found. The only thing that changed was the grass where he had vanished. It turned sort of like it decayed. It turned yellow and brittle, and for years afterward, nothing would grow there. Then, months later, Lang returned. Sort of. His daughter was playing in a field looking for 4-leafed clovers, and that's when she heard it. A voice that sounded a lot like her father, calling for help. It was faint, like it was coming from underground or from behind a wall. It happened more than once, but each time they checked, there was still nothing. Eventually, even the voice stopped. The story was pretty well known at the time. It showed up in the newspaper, and the names, place, and details were consistent with public records. Was it fabricated? Maybe, but everyone there that day remained adamant about what they saw. In 2006, Carol Chase McKelney was driving through Riverside County, California, on her way home from a dog show. As she passed through her old hometown of Riverside, she figured she'd take a quick detour to see the neighborhood she grew up in. It had been years since she visited, and she was curious to see how much it had changed. Except, it wasn't her town. The street names were right, the general layout looked familiar, but her childhood home was completely gone, and so were all of the houses around it. The neighborhood had totally changed, like it had been wiped out and replaced with strange, unfamiliar buildings. She went to look for her grandmother's house. Gone too. Her old school was nowhere to be found. Even the cemetery where several family members were buried didn't look the same. The graves were different, and the whole place just felt wrong, like a dream version of her hometown. Completely shook, she got out of there, and it wasn't until years later that she felt the courage to come back. But this time, everything was normal. Her grandmother's house was there, her childhood home too, the school, everything was just like it always had been. So, what happened? Carol was completely sober, not tired, not on medication. She knew what she saw and what she didn't see. She swore up and down that for a few strange hours, she stepped into some alternate version of her hometown, a place almost like hers, but not quite. In 1978, 23-year-old Stephen Kubacki was a college student studying German at Hope College in Michigan. One February afternoon, he went cross-country skiing near Lake Michigan and never came back. The next day, his skis and backpack were found near the edge of the frozen lake. There were footprints leading out onto the ice, and then nothing. Search and rescue teams looked for weeks, but no trace of him was ever found. Everyone assumed the same thing, that he had fallen through the ice and died. Except, 15 months later, he showed up. Stephen woke up on a grassy hill in a field in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, over 700 miles away from where he disappeared. He was wearing clothes he didn't recognize, with a satchel full of maps he didn't remember collecting. He had a t-shirt from a marathon in Wisconsin, which he didn't recall running, and his last memory was being on the ice. He walked to his aunt's house nearby, and from there eventually reconnected with his parents. Nobody had seen or heard from him in a year and 3 months, but all things considered, he looked healthy. He was just confused like everybody else. When asked what happened, Stephen said he had no idea. He didn't remember anything. It was like someone had hit a reset button on his brain. To this day, he still doesn't talk much about it, and after the incident, he went back to school, earned a degree, and eventually became a clinical psychologist, which is kind of wild considering he's got one of the strangest unsolved disappearance stories on record. But I guess also maybe that makes him the perfect person for the job, you know? know? In March of 2017, Bruno Borges, a 24-year-old psychology student from Brazil, vanished without a trace. His family had last seen him at their home in Rio Branco, and when they realized he hadn't taken his phone, wallet, or anything useful for a getaway, they went into his locked bedroom. And that is when things got really strange. The entire room had been turned into some kind of cryptic research lab. The furniture was gone, replaced with a giant statue of a 16th century philosopher who believed in infinite worlds and extraterrestrials. There were also pages and pages of handwritten text covering the walls, floor to ceiling. Over 14 books worth written in a bizarre code nobody could read. Bruno's family had no idea any of this was going on. He'd apparently been working on it in secret for months. When news about his disappearance came out, internet sleuths obsessed over his case. His encrypted writings were eventually partially decoded. They talked about personal evolution, contact with higher beings, and preparing humanity for something bigger. But still, no one knew where he went. But after 5 months of silence, Bruno showed up back home, barefoot. He wouldn't say much about where he'd been, only that he'd been working on his ideas. His family and police said he was in good health, mentally stable, and not on any substances. He didn't really give interviews, and most of the public still doesn't know why he left or what exactly he was trying to do. In 1935, British Royal Air Force officer Victor Goddard was flying a biplane over an abandoned airfield near Edinburgh, Scotland. I think that's how you say it, and everyone in the comments is gonna be like, that's not how you say it. Well, I'm not Scottish, so I don't know what you want me to do. The place was falling apart, overgrown with weeds, buildings crumbling, not a soul in sight. A few days later, he flew the same route again, but this time, something was off. As he approached the airfield, a sudden storm hit. Thick, swirling clouds, heavy rain, turbulence. Then, just as fast, the sky cleared. Everything looked brighter. Unnaturally so. The airfield below was no longer abandoned. The buildings were intact, freshly painted. Planes were on the ground, yellow ones, which wasn't the standard RAF color at the time, and mechanics in blue overalls were moving around, working on them. None of this made sense in 1935. The colors, the uniforms, the specific model of aircraft he saw, they weren't part of the Air Force yet. When he told people what he'd seen, they thought he was just confused or mistaken. But a few years later, during World War II, that same airfield was brought back to life. It was restored, the planes were painted yellow, and the mechanics wore blue coveralls, just like Goddard had described. It was as if he had seen the future. No one could explain it then, and no one really can now, and Goddard wasn't some nut. He was an air marshal. Dead serious, no nonsense, and he swore up and down till his death that this actually happened. In 2008, a woman named Lorina Garcia from Spain woke up and immediately felt something was off. At first, it was little things. Her bed sheets were different, her pajamas weren't the ones she remembered putting on the night before. Confused, she chalked it up to grogginess and just got ready for work. But when she got to the office, the weirdness escalated. She'd been working at the same place for 20 years, but when she arrived, she realized she didn't work in the same department anymore. She was listed under a completely different role, one she swore she'd never been assigned. Her boss, her coworkers, the whole structure was different, but it got worse. She reached out to her ex-boyfriend, who she'd broken up with months earlier, only to find out that they'd never broken up at all. According to him, they were still together. The man she had been dating, who she'd just seen a few days ago, was nowhere to be found. His number didn't even work. It was like he never existed. Lorina genuinely believed she'd woken up in a different version of reality, one nearly identical to her own, but with very key differences. She went to doctors, psychologists, everyone she could think of trying to explain what happened, but no one had an answer. She was healthy, her memory was sharp, yet her life didn't match her memories. And to this day, Lorina insists that she's from somewhere else, that she somehow crossed into a parallel dimension and has been stuck here ever since. In May of 1972, 4 girls from Southern Utah University were driving home after a rodeo when they took a shortcut through Gadianton Canyon Canyon, near the Utah-Nevada border. Around 10 p.m., the road beneath them changed from black asphalt to smooth, white cement. The desert landscape gave way to unfamiliar grain fields and towering pines, not at all what they expected in southern Utah. Thinking they were lost, they turned around. Then they spotted a small roadside tavern and pulled over to ask for directions. Before anyone could get out, one of the girls screamed. Heading towards them were 4 strange egg-shaped vehicles with tricycle-style wheels and glowing lights. The girls, completely panicked, jumped back in the car and tore off through the canyon. As suddenly as it started, the strange scenery disappeared and the road returned to normal. They eventually crashed into a creek, damaging her car and flattening 3 tires. At dawn, they hiked to the highway and flagged down a trooper named Victoria Lindquist, who was shocked and confused to find that their tire tracks ended abruptly 600 feet into the desert. And despite being found miles from the road, no one could explain how they got there. One hubcap was also missing, which was never found. Back in the 1800s, there was a man named William Cantello, an eccentric British inventor obsessed with creating a rapid-fire automatic weapon. After years of work, he told his family he was heading to the market to sell his invention, and he never came back home. Roughly 20 years later, an American inventor named Hiram Maxim rose to fame with, you guessed it, a rapid-fire automatic firearm. Maxim also looked strikingly similar to Cantello, so much so that Cantello's own children were convinced he was their father. The resemblance became such a nuisance that Maxim addressed it in his autobiography, claiming someone had been impersonating him. Now, that may have been the case. It was just a coincidence that he not only looked just like another man, but also took up the same vocation. But some believe Cantello faked his disappearance and took on a new identity, or that Cantello and Maxim were the same person from 2 different realities, and at some point they switched places, leaving both men stuck in the wrong timeline. This has to be one of the strangest missing persons cases that I have ever heard. In 1763, in a quiet English town of Shepton Mallet, a man named Owen Parfitt vanished without a trace. He was old, frail, and paralyzed. He couldn't walk, couldn't dress himself, he barely moved. Locals say he was a former sailor with a shady past, but by the time this story takes place, he was basically bedridden. Well, one warm evening, Owen was sitting outside his sister's cottage, propped in a chair enjoying the breeze. His sister and a neighbor helped him outside, then they went inside for a bit. They claimed they were gone maybe 15 minutes, and when they came back, the chair was there, still facing the road, but Owen was gone. Now, this wasn't a busy area. It wasn't like someone could sneak up, lift a full-grown man who couldn't walk, and then vanish without making a sound, but it seemed like that's exactly what happened. People searched the fields, wells, nearby roads. Nothing. Days passed, then weeks. Rumors spread. Some started to wonder if he'd just been faking the paralysis for years before finally deciding to... what? Wander off into the wilderness alone? I don't know. It's not a good option. The theories? I don't know. I've got no new ones. In 1961, a girl named Terry Jo Duperalt went on what was supposed to be a dream family vacation, a week-long cruise on a rented sailboat in the Bahamas. But just a few days in, everything went horribly wrong. Terry Jo woke up one night to the sound of footsteps and her brother screaming. When she went topside, she found the deck covered in blood. Her mother and brother were dead. The captain, Julian Harvey, was the only adult left standing, and when he saw her, he didn't say a word, he just stared. She went back below deck, terrified. Minutes later, water started flooding in. The boat was sinking. She escaped onto a small floaty and drifted alone for nearly 4 days under the scorching sun. Dehydrated, sunburned, and half-conscious, she was eventually rescued by a Greek freighter. The fact that she survived at all was almost a miracle. Captain Harvey was rescued days earlier in a lifeboat and told authorities that the boat sank in a freak accident. He said that everyone else was lost at sea, but when he found out Terry Jo survived, he took his own life immediately. She never saw him kill her family, but everyone believes that that is exactly what happened, probably for insurance money. Still, there are holes in the story, and what Terry Jo saw that night, she never fully talked about. Some say she blocked it all out, others think something even darker went down. Till this day, though, the case has never really been solved. There is a book about this, if you're interested. I think it's called like Orphan, Lost at Sea or something like that. And also, if you're a fan of the podcast MFM, if you know, you know, in one of their recap episodes that they're doing right now, the rewinds, they just did this one like a few weeks ago. So go listen to that, read the book. The story's crazy, you guys. That's just crazy. This little girl's just lost at sea, then she's found, and everything was okay for her. Then that's the important part of the story.
Our first story comes to us from Reddit user SadBlackCat666, who tells of the time they were introduced to their deceased great aunt. My maternal grandfather's sister passed away from cardiac issues in 2000. I was born in 2003 and was told for years growing up that this is your aunt, we'll just call her Laura here. She died from heart issues. I was able to understand the concept of death, dying from a very young age. So I understood that she passed away and that I would never meet her. Fast forward to 2014 or 15, I'm at a family function and my mom introduces me to my aunt. She explained to me, this is your Aunt Laura. I was shocked and told them both that I thought she died before I was born. She looked exactly like the woman in the pictures I was shown as a kid, so I knew it was her. They were both confused. After a bit of talking, I went back to hanging out with my cousins. However, the whole thing still spooked me for years to come. When I was 18, I asked my mom if she remembered this incident. She had no clue what I was talking about and still has no clue. She just doesn't remember a damn thing about what happened. I'm in my early 20s now and I'm still confused about the whole ordeal. I sometimes wonder if I slipped into a parallel universe where my great aunt was still alive in the mid-2010s. Striped Macaron posted about her incredibly harrowing near-death experience on Reddit. She'd been 25 years old at the time, driving home from work one night in Los Angeles on a curvy section of road on Sunset Boulevard. Suddenly a car spun out of control in front of her, blocking her lane with no time to halt. With another car beside her, options were limited. She instinctively swerved right then left to avoid collision. Then she felt a surreal flashback to a trip she'd taken with her mother to Disney World. She'd only remembered vague parts of the trip, but this particular memory wasn't one of them. This is when she was convinced her life was flashing before her eyes and that she was going to die. She screamed, "No, this isn't fair. Not yet," as she swerved all over Sunset Boulevard. But then she just stopped and suddenly found herself alone on the road, as if everything had been wiped clean. She drove back home and didn't see a single car the entire way. Sunset Boulevard on a Saturday night was eerily deserted. She reached home and parked the car, still no one in sight. Once inside, she called a friend asking her to confirm that she really was alive, just to ground herself back into reality. She was convinced she might be in a limbo state after death. She finishes by saying, "There was no way mathematically to escape it. There was nowhere for the car on the right to go. This moment has haunted me my whole life. There have been times when I have questioned my own existence. I've wondered if my life since has been a very detailed death trip and I'm actually lying on Sunset Boulevard." The next story comes from Reddit user Cold Old Duck. I was picking up my mom and driving towards the same intersection I always went through. Lights were green. All of a sudden in my head, I felt and heard a split second of pure dread. Someone running the red and hitting me broadside right in the driver's side door. I could feel the crash, being crushed, the pain, the blackness, and it was instantly gone, just left with the dread and terror. I braked hard and slowed to an almost crawl stop at the intersection despite the green light, and a car came flying through the red at high speed a second or two later. Never knew why or how I knew, but it was terrifying. I felt like a cat who had escaped with one life less. Reddit user MaterialWolf8005 brings us this next story entitled, "I died and woke up in a parallel universe." I have sleep apnea, and sometimes if I sleep facing up, I will wake up gasping for air and choking on my saliva. Anyway, I was so tired I slept facing up. I remember waking up freaking out and gasping for air. As I looked to the ceiling, my vision started going black from all angles into a single point. Think of how an old TV turns off. After that, I was staring at myself through a mirror I have facing my bed. I remember thinking, "Oh no, I'm dead." as I looked at myself lying down. Then I saw myself moving as if I was waking up. I woke up. But the craziest part is that as soon as I woke up, I saw myself in the mirror staring at me, but standing up, not laying down. Now this world feels off. I was anxious and depressed, and all of a sudden, I'm fine. I feel like I died in a parallel universe and woke up in this one. It's so weird. I can't explain it, but I feel different. This next story is pretty trippy. It comes from Peyton Lay 0616, who seemed to have watched a monster truck completely vanish right in front of their house. They write, "This happened not too long ago. I was standing on my porch watching my kids play in the front yard. Our street has a crossroad intersection at the end, and I could see it from where I was. As I was watching my two kids, I noticed a big black truck, the kind that has floodlights at the top and bars in front of the grill, pulling up to the intersection from the left road. I saw a bald man driving and two other guys in the bed of the truck, and on the sides were two different flags. One looked like a French flag, I believe, and the other I had never seen before. They looked like they were celebrating, and I remember wondering if maybe their team had won a soccer game or something, because it looked like they were being loud. But the thing was absolutely silent, and I could see them whooping and hollering and chanting. Anyway, they turned down my street, coming towards me. I kept my eyes on them because they were intriguing me. I watched them turn down my street, start coming my way. Now, here's the tricky part. My neighbor had a big SUV in their driveway that blocked off my vision from part of the road, and once that truck, those two flags, and three celebrating men reached the part of the road obstructed by my view of the SUV, they never came back out. I even walked down into my yard to see if maybe they'd pulled into the grass of another neighboring house, but nothing. They just vanished behind the neighbor's car. Always awkward running into someone who recognizes you and you just can't remember their name, or worse, can't remember them at all. This story from Open Temperature 6440 kind of takes that to a different level. It goes as follows. This happened back in like 2014. I went to Walgreens a few blocks from my house at night to buy a few items. While I was there, this guy down the aisle from me started talking to me like he knew me, but I didn't know him. Never seen him before in my life. He asked me how things are going and asked if I was still working for Joe. Joe was the name of my boss that I worked for a while when I was in college. I told him no, I wasn't still working for Joe because I'd graduated and gotten a full-time job. I was so confused and asked how he knew me. He seemed surprised that I didn't remember him and said that he was Joe's son, which is weird because the Joe I worked for didn't have a son, just two daughters. He could tell I was confused and asked if I was okay, and I replied that I was fine, but I didn't remember him. He was still shocked that I didn't know him. Eventually, the conversation ended, and I went on my way. A few months later, I ran into my old boss, Joe, and I told him I ran into someone that said he was his son, and asked just to make sure he didn't have a son. He said, nope. Not that I know of. I still don't know what to make of that encounter, but it was bizarre to say the least. My theory is that I somehow entered an alternate universe or reality, but I don't know. Maybe I dreamed the whole thing. Who knows? The following is a story from DSLY4425, who writes about a possible glitch in the Matrix. I remember writing a term paper in college about a specific disease and disease process that still exists to this day, and the treatment at the time, specifically that at the time there was no medication available on the market to treat it, although there was a lot of research being done. Fast forward 15 years, and I was debating with my pharmacist, who was also my boss, how long a medication for said disease was on the market, and we got curious and looked it up. In this dimension, the medication has been on market since the late 90s, which would have been high school for me. I definitely wouldn't have written my paper on the subject or gotten a high score on it, for that matter, if the medication really was on the market in the late 90s, as the paper was written in 2003 at the earliest. And I wrote the paper on that specific disease and process as I was working with patients directly impacted by it at the time, and had taken a good deal of extra training in my field of work, specifically with those patients, so I kind of knew my stuff and where research was heading, which at the time was developing the drugs that are now on the market, but none were out. Following story comes to us from Wolfie is Back in Black. who was in high school when this happened, living in the same neighborhood she lives in now in Mumbai. The area hadn't undergone much development back then, with dense vegetation covering what is now occupied by buildings. The Redditor was very familiar with the area, having spent her teenage years exploring its nooks and crannies with her then boyfriend. One day, they were lost in conversation and wandered towards the end of the road. Without paying attention, they turned right and accidentally walked into the last building on the lane, and what they found was very strange. In total contrast to the well-maintained surroundings, this particular building was dilapidated, like it had been bombed and set on fire. It had an eerie silence about it, devoid of the usual signs of life. No birds, no insects, nothing. There was moss growing in places and chunks of concrete had fallen off. They had never seen the building before and hastily left, joking about the place looking like a haunted apartment. Well, 2 weeks later, she found herself in the same lane with her cousin, and lo and behold, that dystopian looking building had completely transformed. It was painted in vibrant colors, flowers bloomed in pots, and there was vegetation surrounding it that would have taken months to grow. She approached a guard who was stationed nearby and asked him if the building had been recently renovated, and he looked at her like she was crazy and just said, no. From Reddit user Star884, we have the blue truck. The story goes as follows. My mother and I were on our way to a funeral. We stopped by the corner gas station to grab drinks on the way. I was in the passenger seat, my mom was driving. She turns around, not moving, but the car is in gear, to where I thought she was backing out of the spot. I always look in the mirrors when anyone is reversing, just a natural habit. So thinking she's backing out, I was like, whoa, wait, there's someone coming. I saw a pretty big light blue truck coming very fast behind us. My mom says, cool, I see it, and stops. All of a sudden, there is another car coming pretty fast on the complete opposite side. The freaking blue truck disappeared though, just gone. It had nowhere to go. We were all literally about to crash all three cars. Somehow, it was gone. So my mom and I both saw the big light blue truck coming. We either had something happen or we had a shared delusion. And finally, we have a strange story from Reddit user London Mama 2019 who had a very strange experience in a graveyard. Probably the last place you'd want to have a strange experience in. I had taken my 6-year-old for a walk to the playground. We just moved houses, so didn't know the area well. So I checked my Apple Maps to see if there was a quicker way home, as my little one was starting to complain a bit. The quickest way was through a graveyard. We started walking and the birds were singing. It was quite sunny, perfectly normal. As we walked further though, the atmosphere just changed. It's really hard to explain, but it felt completely flat. No birds, no people, just a really oppressive feeling. We also noticed that some things looked not quite right, like gravestones facing in different directions. I'd never seen this before and it was bizarre. Some were in rows, some sideways, some facing the opposite direction, and there was a huge pile of dirt against the side of the little church. I didn't want to scare my daughter, so kept chatting. Then she seemed to notice it too and said, "This is horrible, I don't like it here." I checked my map and it had gone crazy. It was directing us the opposite way and kept changing and moving around. I followed the path round, and as the main street came into view, everything seemed to go back to normal. Birds, people, traffic sounds, even the sun seemed to get brighter. When we got home, we talked about it. I told my husband, my daughter called it the creepy graveyard. The following week we went back to show my husband, but it was like a different place, no weird vibes at all. It was very peaceful but completely normal, and we couldn't find the gravestones facing different ways. I read a book last week about time slips, and the way it felt was described by a few people who had experienced time slips. So now I'm wondering if this could be what happened.
Number 9, we have the Beatles ain't dead. These were the claims of James Richard after he took a trip down Abbey Road and ended up in a parallel universe where the Beatles were still kicking. To start off, I have to say that James Richard is not this guy's real name. He uses a fake name so the powers that be won't find him. But his story goes like this. He says that him and his dog were going for a stroll through the Del Puerto Canyon in California, and then out of nowhere he fell through a hole in space and time. He woke up in another version of Earth. He was in a hospital bed and there was a man named Jonah sitting next to him in the bed. And then Jonah started to give him the rundown on interdimensional travel. Through their discussions they started to talk about music, and it turns out that Richards was in an alternate version of Earth where the Beatles were still alive and cranking out tunes. James Richard even brought back a cassette tape with the music of this living Beatles band. The cassette was called Everyday Chemistry, and it sounds like he just spliced together some Beatles songs and some Wings songs, but who knows, maybe this is what the Beatles would have sounded like if two of their members never died. At number 8 we have the Dobbses. Frank and Althea Dobbs were the leading minds in a new scientific practice called chaos science. It's the idea that consciousness could possibly be its own universe. They started to pick up some steam and some other people decided to join their cause. They moved the team to a ghost town of Ong's Hat, New Jersey. Here they started to do research on interdimensional travel. I have to say this does sound like a cult. Well, cult or not, they claim that they've succeeded in this practice. It's said that they found a wormhole which led them to a parallel version of Earth that never had been consumed by humans, and they chose to stay there. Considering the state of the planet right now, I would say this was a very good choice. At number 7 we have Whose Life Is This? You go to sleep a happy lady and then you wake up and you're back with your ex-boyfriend? This sounds like a bender that you wish didn't happen, but for Lorina Garcia, this wasn't that at all. She woke up in her bed and she noticed a bunch of minor details were off. The setup of her room was a little off and her sheets weren't the ones that she loved. Never mess with a lady's sheets. Then her ex-boyfriend walked into the room, but the crazy thing is, it wasn't her ex. They never broke up and they were still together. After this she was like, okay, this is crazy, but I gotta go to work. So she went into her job and she had a different job and a different boss who was someone she had never seen before, and she couldn't explain any of this. At number 6 we have Riverside Down. I don't know how you can go through an interdimensional portal without noticing it, but apparently this happens quite a bit. Carol Chase McElhenney was driving through Cali when she decided to take a short trip to her hometown of Riverside to see how things never really change. It can always be a little bit of a shock to go back to where you grew up, but this time things had changed a lot. Actually, everything had changed. The layout of the town was the same, but all the houses were different. The home she grew up in was warped. She was concerned that she had taken a wrong turn, but she found her old school which she went to, which was exactly where it should be. But then she started noticing strange figures around the town, people who looked a little off and definitely creepy. This was enough for her, and then she sped out of there. She returned to this town at a later date and everything was back to normal, but she never forgot that time she slipped into a parallel dimension. At number 5 we have Interdimensional Cabin. No, this isn't another movie pitch from me, although this would have been an amazing movie pitch. There's a cabin in the Markawasi Stone Forest that is said to open up a door to a different time. Some women were hiking through the woods and they saw some people outside this cabin dancing and lighting torches. Before you run away in fear, they weren't lighting torches to get all angry mob, but it was because they didn't have any sort of modern technology. They were all dressed in clothes that looked like they were pulled out of the Spanish Golden Age. The people dancing eventually entered the cabin and the women went to investigate. One of the women walked halfway into the cabin and her friend grabbed her and pulled her out. She immediately fell to the ground and couldn't move half of her body. Half of her body was paralyzed. The women ran away, and some people speculate that the reason the woman couldn't move half of her body after she entered the cabin is because she entered another dimension halfway and then was pulled out, which caused her body to get all screwed up. I don't really know if there's good science on this. At number 4 we have What Road Is This? The crazy thing about all these stories is how calm people are when they get transported to another world. Pedro Olivia Ramirez was driving through Spain and was headed to the town of Alaca de Guadarira. This was a drive he could do on autopilot. He had done it so many times before, but this time something went terribly wrong. He made a usual turn that should have led him down a small road, but he was suddenly on a 6-lane highway. He didn't recognize any of this at all, and everywhere around him there was these buildings that seemed like they were pulled from another world. Eventually he pulled off the highway, and to his surprise he ended up in Alaca de Guadarira. He tried going back to find this highway, but he never could. See, if that was me, I would be swerving all over the road and then would pass out from a panic attack. At number 3 we have a wrong turn. When you go on a road trip, you probably want to go cross country, not cross dimensions. There were 4 girls driving through a desert in Nevada, and out of nowhere things started to get a little strange. They saw street signs that had an unknown language on them. They didn't have any sort of markings of any alphabet that any of them could recognize. So what's the best course of action when you end up in a strange neighborhood? Well, you ask for directions, you silly little goose. Goose. So they saw some dudes hanging out in what looked like to be a truck stop diner, and they drove up beside them to ask them where they were. But then things got strange. These guys started to freak out, and it didn't take long for the women to realize that these guys were humanoids, but definitely not human. So they hightailed it out of there. This is when they started to get followed by some oval-shaped vehicles. The girl driving slammed on the gas, and she must have pushed it up to 88 because then they were back in Nevada, and the oval pursuers had vanished. And number 2, we have the Children of Woolpit. This story is bonkers. We're going back to the 12th century. Everyone in the town of Woolpit was chilling and doing a bunch of farm stuff and just trying to survive. You know what it was like back then. Then 2 kids came walking into town. They had green skin and spoke a gibberish language. The people took these kids in because they're kids and they seemed like they were terrified. They fed them, but the kids would only eat beans. Then not long after this, the boy of the 2 died. But the girl lived on. She eventually learned how to speak English and told everyone that she was from another world, somewhere where the sun never rose and it was perpetually twilight. She said she was on her father's farm and heard a crash, and then she was in Woolpit. She never found out where she was from, but she did eventually settle down and start a family. And for the number 1 spot, we have Shadow of a Doubt. Interdimensional travel is apparently impossible because space-time bends matter and light, but because of this bending of light, there is a chance that we could see shadows from another dimension. This could have been what happened to a young woman who was living in Massachusetts. She said one night she saw a shadowy figure appear in a room out of her closet. The figure moved close to her and then was followed by another. And then another. Some of them were wearing strange clothes, and one of them seemed to be wearing glasses. Then they started to surround her, and she did the smart thing and hightailed it out of her room. Of course, you're not going to stick around with the ghost things. There could be the chance that these were some sort of beings peeking in from another dimension.
Kicking off the list at number 10, Katie rocks. You ever hop in the shower first thing in the morning and it feels like literal paradise? Otherworldly, some would say. Well, a new TikTok trend has me meditating in the shower now, apparently. Here we go. TikTok users left, right, and center are stepping forward, or rather backwards, with their claims on entering parallel universes. Nashville model Katie Rocks recently kicked this off, and she used the social media platform to recall a 2017 trip to Paris that some of her classmates claimed missed the flight, although Katie saw them with her own eyes. I remember walking on that aircraft past 2 of my friends and sitting like 3 rows behind them. Then the 4 of us took a taxi back to the apartments we were staying in while we were in school, and I distinctly remember this. 2 days later, they're talking about how they weren't 3 rows in front of us, and to this day I have no idea why they remember missing the flight. That's way too close to the plot of Final Destination. Honestly, this creeps me out just reading about it. I can't even begin to unravel this one. No way. The same user, Katie Rocks, posted again a month later, this time saying she's since discovered the ability to shift realities. Showers. Hot showers are the key, apparently. I would have guessed baths, but showers are cool too. We'll take those. Number 9, a familiar face. Username Highlife No Miller Lite posted this one a couple months back on Reddit. Great name, also. Gotta say, that's a really good name. It's since got a lot of attention. Let me know what you think. They say, I'm from a very dry, hot state in the US, and I was visiting California on a trip with my wife. While out eating, we both witnessed a person that looked exactly like me. Same typical mid-fade and head dents inherited from my father. Same body type, only chubby rather than my more slim and athletic frame. I saw the side profile from the back as they walked away from view, and it was my exact face. That's so creepy. My wife had a direct view but could not remember directly what my face looked like. But she noted similarities from my body to head and even the way that I walked. I couldn't believe what we saw. Any thoughts? Question mark? I mean, if you didn't mention the head dents and got that specific, this wouldn't have stuck with me like it did. I also love the subtle roast on the other you. You're like, yeah, this guy was just like me, only, you know, not ripped. Otherwise, that's quite creepy. Thanks for sharing. Number 8, quantum leap. So yeah, I went down that rabbit hole I talked about and I discovered another TikTok. How fun. We love these. Awesome. This quantum leap was obtained by Marian Valenza. She took to the social media platform to implore others to take the leap. You know, no more manifestation Mondays. The key to these quantum leaps is a hot shower. Yeah, a hot shower. How convenient is that? Thank God it doesn't suck, you know? Thank God it's not a cold ice bath, or else no one would know. Valenza explains the first rule here. Number 1 is that you want to give yourself enough time because you don't want to rush this. Obviously, you want to do this with intentionality, she says. Yeah, sorry I'm late, boss. I don't want to rush my hot quantum shower. You know how it is. He's like, oh yeah, classic. Next step is to literally visualize the water cleansing you so that it removes all your limiting beliefs, the negative thoughts that you have, all the things holding you back from stepping into your higher self. Visualize not currently being late for work. And then there you go. You're set. I'm gonna try this tomorrow morning. I'm just gonna have a hot quantum shower and arrive at 10:15. Number 7, Sleep Street. This one comes from username Oopsies. It's like oopsies, but with a bit more Reoccurring dreams have never been so haunting. Forgot it's a dark list. Here we go. Ever since I was a teenager, I've dreamed about an alternate life where I go to university and work in a city that I've never been in. It started around when I was 16 or 17 and now I'm 25. It's super detailed where I go on hikes, I hang out with friends, I bike through neighborhoods and do mundane everyday life things. The university is outside of a major city and I'm always exploring nature, beaches, islands, all that jazz. Last night I was feeling sick and in return had one of the most vivid dreams I've had in a long time. I met someone and developed a deep relationship that felt incredibly emotional and real. Luckily I woke up right when I was trying to navigate Google Maps to drive to a park, so I remember the streets that we were on. The street was called Dutch Island Road. I never heard of it in real life, so I decided to look it up. The only thing that popped up was a rural area in Rhode Island. It wasn't exactly the same layout of the roads I remember on the map, but the nature and area looked eerily similar to what I saw while driving. I start looking around the area, clicking different locations, and I start to freak out on how everything looks just like in my dream. Mind you, I've never been to Rhode Island, but the weirdest part is that specific buildings in the Rhode Island University and Warwick area ones, those are the same ones that I saw in my dream all the time. I've always thought that my dreams are a glimpse of living an alternate universe, and I feel like this detail solidifies the potentiality of it being a reality. Thoughts? Too many big words. Those are my thoughts. Potentiality. I'm gonna start using that in the next list. You'll hear that from me in the future, for sure. Otherwise, so scary. Hope that goes away. Or doesn't? I don't know. Do you like it? I wouldn't like that. If I dreamt about an alternate life, I'm like, yeah, I actually have 2 jobs. It's exhausting. I never sleep. Number 6, good times, dad times. Coming from Reddit user Apprehensive Humor 55, they say, when I was young, from the ages of around 3 to 10, I was truly convinced I'd already lived a full life. I remember being around 40 years old with a wife and 3 kids, 2 boys and a girl. Then one day I just woke up as a child and my past was all just a big blur with random memories that would come to me here or there. I'm smiling because this is funny, but like it's so scary. This is my biggest fear, I think, in life. It made no sense. My parents said that I used to tell stories about when I was a dad and they would just laugh it off and be like, oh, that's your imagination, obviously. But deep down, I genuinely did have these strange memories of a past life. For instance, when I was 4 years old, my family went to Disney World, and the whole car ride down, I was telling stories about when I was a dad and I went to Disney World. Just a kid in the back seat with milk, like, oh yeah, these roads. Still haven't fixed them. The weirdest thing is that when we got to Disney World, I knew that I'd already been there before. I knew where everything in the park was and was essentially showing my family everything. At that time, my family just thought it was weird that I knew where everything was, but at the time in my head, it all made sense. To me, I just knew where all the rides were because of when I was a dad. After a while, I stopped telling these stories of when I was a dad because my siblings would always make fun of me for it. I'm not laughing at you, I'm laughing, this is my worst, I'm laughing at you a little bit, this is crazy. Eventually, I just started going on with my life and haven't thought about much of it since, although I wish I did because the memories back then were much more vivid and real than how they are now. He's gonna be so confusing 30 years to his kids. He's like, when I was a dad for the first time, Disney was way less busy. Kids are like, first time? What other family? What are you talking about? Why is mom crying? That's so scary. I buy into this. I don't know, the afterlife, maybe that past dad died and then you were reborn? I don't know, that's scary. I don't want to think of it. Number 5, spirit animal. Do you believe in spirit animals? I kind of do. I want to, at least. Ever since I watched Harry Potter, I always wanted a Patronus. Mine would be a frog for sure. It'd be like a little lanky frog. Wouldn't be cool at all. This next one makes me want to believe. Coming from user Less Cold, they say, about 30 years ago, I was a young college student heading back to college after break in an overnight bus. I was about 19, didn't drink or anything, had no history of mental illness, and was reading a book when seamlessly, I wasn't in the bus anymore. I was now swimming around a rock formation which I knew was part of my hunting territory and was chasing a fish, which I then caught in my mouth and could feel the bones crushing between my teeth and it wriggling against my whiskers. That's how they posted it. No in between. They're just like, yeah, I was reading a book and all of a sudden I'm a fish. I was totally at ease. I was fast and agile and I could feel the drag of the water, like, you know, the pull of the current, question mark. I like how they included that. Mansplaining the current of the water. They're like, I being a fish know this, but do you know about this? I'm like, yeah, we know about currents, man. I'll continue. As I moved effortlessly through it, I knew my body and where I was going and what I was doing, and there was no alarm whatsoever that anything was amiss. You know, I didn't realize that I was really a 19-year-old on a bus. The whole experience couldn't have lasted longer than 30 seconds or so, and then just as seamlessly as I once was there, I was then again back on the bus. I remember sitting there for a second, staring at the page of my book before, you know, having a WTF just happened reaction kicked in, and then I had a bit of a mental freak out. Then a few years later, I saw a documentary about sea otters, and I knew then that that's what I had been for that brief moment in time. I knew it's impossible, but it happened to me, and surely I can't be the only one. I don't know, man. I've never been a sea otter before. Chris, have you been a sea otter? You don't think so? You don't think? You never know. Never say never, though. Has anybody ever heard of something like this, or has it happened to you? Have you been reading a book and then all of a sudden you're a sea otter eating a fish with whiskers? If so, sound off down below. Sea otters are just smacking the keyboard. They're like, help me switch back. Number 4, switching universes. Coming from Mulks23, this one is so specific that it may very well just be real. Honestly, I'm a little convinced. I've been wanting to share this for some time now. A few months ago, one morning, I believe when I woke up, I did so to a different universe. Similar to ours, but different in some aspects. Before I went to sleep the night before, I kept my Surface tablet on my nightstand and it was absolutely fine. The next day when I opened it though, I could see a large crack across the top. There's nothing, repeat nothing, that could have caused the crack. I was disappointed, of course, the tablet's new, but I didn't think much of it. However, over the course of the following days, I noticed some things/events are significantly different than how I remember them to be. An actress that I know was married to a gangster, is happily now married to a businessman. A different actress married said gangster, a name that I would have definitely known. I'm from India and I settled in US, and this is a Bollywood actress in question. A series that was being released on Amazon Prime is now on Netflix, ? Yeah, that happens all the time. I'm still asking those questions myself. I'm watching Harry Potter on like 3 different platforms, like what's going on? The movie Morbius, I've seen this movie. I thought they must have remade this or something, but nope, it was a new movie. A few other things as well, but those I can attribute to misplaced memories. Not the above though. Also, I definitely did not hit my head or anything which could have caused me to remember things differently. I mean, after all of that, I gotta ask, how is Morbius? It doesn't look that bad, honestly. Hope Spider-Man's in it. Thanks for sharing, Mulks23. Hopefully you're in the right universe. Number 3, cosmic commute. This one has me stumped, folks, I'm not gonna lie. Username IcyFlame2U says, in January, I left my friend's home at almost midnight. I live not even 10 minutes north of her. I remember getting in my car and then boom, I'm pulled over by the police. It's 2:10 a.m. now, and I'm 1 hour north of her, close to crossing state lines. In a city I have never been to, I don't even know how to get out there and what freeways I took, as we are not really close to any freeways. How did I get there, and what happened to a whole extra hour? When I returned home, I was having such anxiety from it all that I was throwing up and everything. We just don't understand what happened. The comments were supportive here. Some suggest to look into epilepsy, but the OP responded right after saying that they did, and luckily that wasn't the case. So, what do you guys think it is? Comment down below. I think definitely a time leap. That's pretty crazy. Number 2, dog treats and universe leaps. Anything involving dogs, I buy into it. I mean, who would lie about dogs for attention, right? Only psychos, I guess. Username mememan42069 says, when I was getting ready to go to my brother's house, I packed some stuff for my dog since he was coming. I put my dog's toys, leash, 2 dog shirts, and treats. I packed them all up, and when I got to my brother's house, I was looking for my dog's treats, and my dog's treats were not there. I vividly remember putting my dog's treats in a bag, and the weird thing was, when I got home, his treats were in the exact spots that I picked it up from, and it didn't fall out of the bag, and somebody didn't put it back because I live alone. So I was thinking maybe I slipped into a parallel universe where I didn't pack my dog treats. I've been weirded out by it for the past year, and I've been trying to come up with a better reason. I mean, that sounds alarming, 100%, but panicking about anything that involves dog treats, it's just hilarious to me. Sorry. Yeah, I hope you figure out your problem, but more importantly, I hope your dog doesn't get stiffed on treats again.
Number 10, the babushka lady. The year 1963 might send your history teacher into a spiral about all things that happened in that year. On the top of that list was the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, the bullet that shook the nation. With multiple eyewitnesses yet no initial clue as to who the shooter was, even though the case pretty much settled on Lee Harvey Oswald, there are still a ton of conspiracy theories surrounding his death. One of which surrounds a mysterious lady named the babushka lady, an unknown elderly woman who may have photographed the events. It is clear that she took multiple photos of the assassination, but none of her photos ever showed up. Despite multiple searches for the woman, she never showed up. To add more fuel to the fire, could it have been that she was a simple interdimensional traveler sent to document an alternate reality? Who knows? I mean, maybe. There's a reason there's a might in the title, so. Number 9, Alexandria Alexis. You may have seen the side profile of a mysterious woman named Alexandria Alexis circulate social media a little while ago, around 2013. Then, if you were following the story, you may have heard that it was debunked. Or was it? For those of you who are unfamiliar, Alexandria Alexis was a mysterious actress who suddenly graced New York society in the year 1898. She took the stage by storm. Some adored her, others abhorred her, saying that the woman was likely insane. She kept saying she was from the future after all, specifically 2025. But in 1899 on New Year's Eve, she simply disappeared, never to be seen again. So, who was she really? Well, it is said that she wasn't a time traveler at all, but a British actress who appeared in New York named Grace Rawlinson. But if you look at the two pictures, they kind of look a little similar, but not too much. So, was the mystery really debunked, or is there another weirder explanation that they don't want us to know? Number 8. D.B. Cooper, okay. Hate me if you want. I debated putting D.B. Cooper on this list, but here we are. It's part 3, okay? How does a man who no one knows steal a bunch of money, leap out of a plane, and entirely disappear? Unless you're some mysterious, mischievous Norse god. Tom Hiddleston, what's up? Love you. Anyways, the year 1971, an afternoon on November 24th in Portland, Oregon. Armed with sunglasses and a will to pull off a mystery, the so-named Dan Cooper sidled onto flight number 305 bound for Seattle, Washington. Bourbon and soda in hand, he made some cheeky eyes at the flight attendant. She blushed. Was he the one? I'm editorializing, but you're still watching, so sue me. He asked her to sit and slides her a note. Was it his number? Nope. It simply said that he had a bomb, not that he was da bomb, or she was da bomb. A rerouted plane, 4 parachutes, and $200,000 in $20 bills later, and Dan Cooper leapt out of the plane before he could break any more hearts, never to be seen again. It's one thing to disappear without a trace. He could have fallen into the ocean, but who was he in the first place? Cooper was a man without a past, in this universe at least, but who knows about the next. Number 7. Wolf Messing. The man who knew too much. A man so mysterious and enigmatic, he even had minds like Einstein and Freud stumped. Wolf Messing had to be from another world, or perhaps he was simply a man who lived between them. Wolf Messing is most famous for a psychic prediction he made in World War II against Adolf Evil Man. In 1937, Messing said, and I quote, and I get to say his name right now, so sorry YouTube, "If declares war in the East, his death awaits him," unquote. He was specifically referring to an attack on Russia, which funnily enough, eventually came true. This prediction angered the German leaders so much that he sent out a bounty of 20,000 Reichsmarks on his head. He was eventually arrested, but escaped after hypnotizing the guards that there were diamonds all over the floor. Damn, Messing. What a mess. But that's not all. Freud put him to the test himself in Einstein's own apartment. He gave Messing a mental command, then left the room. Messing was successful and did exactly as instructed. He left the room, grabbed a pair of tweezers, and pulled a hair from Einstein's mustache, all without Freud uttering a single word. Messing didn't disappear, but actually died in 1974. Whether or not he could physically travel between worlds, it does appear that Messing's talents were not of this one. Number 6. The Lost Colony of Roanoke. We've talked about individuals appearing and reappearing, but what about a whole group of people just... The Lost Colony of Roanoke is one of the most famous disappearances in history. Great Britain tried to colonize this island a few times, initially attempted by Sir Walter Raleigh. They were already having trouble with a lack of supplies, as well as they didn't have a good relationship with the surrounding indigenous tribes. Gee, I wonder why. Anyways, they went back to get more supplies, and when mission leader John White returned, there was not a soul there. The fort was fortified, but not a single person remained. The only clue left behind was a cryptic word that said Croatoan, an island they thought the colony had retreated to, but they were still never found. Did some kind of mal event befall them, or did they accidentally find an entirely new world to explore? Only they know the answers. Number 5. Sir Victor Goddard. The year was 1935 when a winged commander named Sir Victor Goddard, what a great name, right? Took a flight he will never forget. The man was to fly his open cockpit biplane from Scotland to England, but he may have flown somewhere else by accident. He was passing over the World War I constructed Drem airfield in Edinburgh that was a bit of a fixer-upper. That was how he left it, but when he returned home 24 hours later, he flew into an unusual storm, causing him to lose control of his airplane. Miraculously, he recovered from a downward spiral just mere feet above a stony beach, but when he rose back up into the sky, the once stormy display was now overwhelmed by sunshine. And when he came across the airfield he'd seen when he left, it was entirely restored. There were planes he didn't recognize, along with men in blue jumpsuits, which was weird as the engineers typically wore brown. Not even Goddard himself ever unraveled the mystery, but one thing is for sure, Goddard took a detour that wasn't on the flight plan. Number 1, last but not least, the story of Ron and Chuck Quinn. Whilst on the hunt for ancient gold in Arizona, Ron and Chuck Quinn made
may have stumbled upon something even older and far more mysterious. In 1956, the brotherly duo were 3 weeks into their adventure when they saw two strange large balls of blue-green light. Sounds like an alien encounter. Well, perhaps, though things get even stranger. They discovered that the lights were a reoccurring phenomenon in the area, and the brothers saw them several more times. Later on in their travels, they passed a stone archway that looked odd among the landscape. They discussed it with a local native named John, who warned that anyone who passed through it never returned. See where I'm going with this? They even threw rocks and stuff and nothing came back. It was nicknamed the doorway to the gods, for on top of the disappearances, some reported seeing shimmering figures through the doorway. When the brothers returned to it, at first nothing strange happened. They threw stuff through it, dropped dead on the other side, not a big deal, until one day, the door started shimmering. The men vowed never to return, except 4 years later Chuck couldn't help himself, so he ventured back and sought out the archway. When he got there, he saw the archway and also a canyon that he didn't remember being there, but when he went to return on his way back, he suddenly realized out of nowhere he had just traveled 250 yards away from where he was when he began his descent back, having no recollection of traveling that far. Did Chuck enter the doorway and something erased his memory? I suppose we will never know. Number 10. Kaspar Hauser. I actually think someone mentioned this name last time in the comments or in another video, so whoever you are, thank you. I just couldn't find the comment again. Kaspar Hauser appeared out of nowhere, and wherever his name appears, rumors encircle it. Some say he was even the infamous Man in the Iron Mask. He was first discovered limping through the streets of Germany in the 1800s and would accept no food but black bread and water. He was carrying an envelope addressed to the cavalry captain in Nuremberg and could barely speak. The locals eventually taught him German in order to discern where he was from, but when he could finally speak enough of the language, they discovered he didn't know where he was from or who his parents were, only that he grew up in a cell too short for him, hence the limp. Very Iron Masky. The royal courts took an interest in him and he became a sort of beloved enigma, except by those who tried to assassinate him. Adding to the mystery, the man evaded countless attacks until he was finally killed by a stabbing in 1838. No one knew the motives or who the killer was. Only a note left in mirror writing said, "Hauser will be able to tell you quite precisely how I look and from where I am. To save Hauser the effort, I want to tell you myself from where I come. I come from the Bavarian border on the river. I will even tell you the name MLA. Where did this man come from, and if it was where we think he came from, were there others? Others who wanted him dead. His tombstone reads, "Here lies Kaspar Hauser, riddle of his time." Number 9. Gil Perez. I'm actually kind of jealous of this one. If I could have any superpower in the world, it would be teleportation, hands down. I think about this a lot actually. Want pizza for lunch? Boom! Italy. Need a little vacay beach time? Boom, baby! Gil Perez may have unlocked the secret to teleportation hundreds of years ago in the 1590s. The key is you have to be really tired. It's a wonder that this hasn't already happened to me. Gil Perez was acting as a sentry for the Governor General of the Philippines, which requires a lot of standing and waiting. While he was on duty, not doing a very good job evidently, he heard the general had been assassinated, and due to the long hours, he started to feel faint at the news and took a moment to brace himself and closed his eyes while leaning against the wall. When he opened his eyes, he was surrounded by soldiers in uniforms unlike his own, and after they arrested him, he realized he was in Mexico? He told them what had happened to his general, and when they discovered he was telling the truth, they sent him back via ship. Just how he got to Mexico is a mystery, but I will consider carrying my passport with me at all times, just in case this ever happens to me. Please? Come on, I want some ramen. Number 8. The Man from Lisbia. I mentioned the man from Torrid last time, well here is the man from Lisbia. If you just arrived from a parallel universe, I bet you'd be a little confused as to what's going on. Parisian police found a man wandering around the city in 1905 that they decided to interrogate because they didn't know what the heck he was doing. He didn't speak the language, and when they asked where he was from, he said Lisbia. Sounds a lot like Lisboa or Lisbon, right? So they called in a translator from Portugal, but the man didn't speak Portuguese. In fact, he didn't speak any language they recognized, though it did follow the same patterns as most languages do. Eventually, the police had spent enough time with him and arrived at enough dead ends to decide to let the man go, but were committed to keeping an eye on him because they weren't getting safe vibes. They let him off with a warning, but almost as soon as they let him go, they never heard or saw him again. So where did he go? into a parallel universe traveling through space and time. Whoa, anyways. Number 7, Jerome of Sandy Cove. This is actually a pretty famous supernatural story here in Canada. The tale of Jerome of Sandy Cove. Like some others on this list, the event occurred in the 1800s in 1863. A boy had been walking on the beach and encountered an old man who appeared to be suffering. Very Great Expectations-y. The man couldn't speak English and only mumbled to the boy even after he was picked up and examined by authorities. His legs had been severed professionally at the knee, but no one knew how he got there, and it hadn't been done by anyone close by. They continued to try and communicate with him, and a woman named Jean-Nicolas, who was multilingual, tried to speak Latin, French, Italian, and Spanish, but there wasn't a glimmer from the man. The only thing they could barely make out was when the man mumbled something like Jerome. The man became a mystery and a local oddity all the way up until he passed away in 1912. There is even a real gravesite you can visit. How did a man with no legs and barely a name and no one to claim him end up on a beach alone? There's only one explanation, or several, depending how wild you want to get with it. You do you. Number 6, Utsuro-bune. This one could have a relationship to alien technology or interdimensional travel. There's a reason there's a might. You decide and I'll let the story speak for itself, shall we? The setting, 19th century Japan in a small village. According to scrolls recording the incident, a strange ship shaped like a rice bowl washed ashore. It had glowing lights inside and looked nothing like anything anyone had ever seen. Sounds like an alien ship crashed, right? That's what I thought. Well, it could be, but upon the description inside, it may sound a little too familiar to be from beyond our world. When villagers peered inside the ship, they saw food that looked similar to candy, as well as a kind of plush carpeting, very 60s or 90s depending. Then, when the ship opened, an alleged 18-year-old red-headed woman with white hair extensions clutched a strange box emerged. She didn't speak their language and no one could figure out where she came from. Something about this story sounds too familiar, especially with the hair extensions, and it makes me wonder, could this be a ship from the future or another future that somehow landed here? With no way of knowing, I guess we might as well have fun with the answer. Go for it! Let us know in the comments. Number 5, Ettore Majorana. Ageless, elusive, and remarkably intelligent. Just 3 ways to describe Ettore Majorana. A man who disappeared, then reappeared, leaving questions in his wake every single time. Majorana was a scientist born in 1906 that made major headlines, not only due to his discoveries, but because of his disappearances. Being plural. He was pronounced dead at age 32 after he allegedly tried to flee fascist Italy to take up residency in Buenos Aires. A plot revealed by a lone witness who said he met him twice before he disappeared. The witness stated that both times they met, Majorana revealed different scientific discoveries he made, but when the man vanished, they assumed he died. That is until a strange photo turned up decades later. In it was clearly Ettore Majorana, taken 20 years after he died, posing with another man and did not appear to have aged a single day. The photo was then reevaluated in 2011 and it was confirmed that the man in it was in fact Majorana. My question is, what was he researching and what did he learn? Is this a question of time travel, or was Majorana able to figure out the impossible, interdimensional travel? Wherever he is, who knows if we will ever see him again. Number 4, David Lang. Okay, this one is definitely a case of interdimensional travel if I've ever heard one. Kind of. I just hope he's okay. In the 1880s, I feel like the 1800s was a weird time, because this is a very common, century for weird things to happen. Anyways, in the 1880s, David Lang, a simple farmer with an overall happy life, was expecting the arrival of his friend August Peck. On the day of his visit, he was expecting to see David greet him with open arms, but instead, a shrill scream cut through the air. As Peck approached the house, he saw, or rather didn't see, his friend slowly fade away into the air while he was walking towards them. But wait, it gets stranger. Peck reported seeing a strange circle form after Lang's figure had disintegrated, and that nothing ever grew in that area ever again. Lang's daughter didn't witness the event, but had heard her father call out to her while she was collecting firewood on the other side of the house. This sounds like something out of the TV show Fringe, if anybody ever watched that. For whatever reason, something cracked in the world that day, swallowing up a simple farmer, bringing him to a world we probably will never know, unless what happened to David Lang happens to you. Before we hit our top 3, do us a favor and smash that like button, and as always, remember to subscribe because it's nice and We like it. Number 3, Ditterichi's disappearance. There have definitely been a few epic prison escapes in the past through various methods, the old digging a hole with a spoon, bribing a few guards, planning an outside job. But Ditterichi managed to disappear into thin air. In 1815, Ditterichi was serving time in a Prussian prison for impersonating and extorting his dead employer. The prison was infamously heavily guarded and housed some of the most cunning prisoners in Europe, but no one has any explanation for how he escaped. On his way to the exercise yard, suddenly Ditterichi's shackles were empty. The man had disappeared into plain sight and left guards aghast as the shackles once around his wrists clattered to the floor. After several investigations, they finally ruled his disappearance as an act of God, or a crack in the space-time swallowed him up. I think both are equally likely. What do you think? Number 2, the runner. This is the tale of James Warson, a man who loved to run, though some would say a little too much. He was a British shoemaker in the 1830s, see 1800s again, right? With a passion for running that made him famous in his town. Not only was he fast, but he had incredible stamina, qualities that led to a bet made with his friends that said he couldn't run on a 16-mile well-known trail without stopping. Warson was a betting man, so of course he took on the challenge with relish. It became a whole event. His friends brought a horse and carriage with them to travel with him to watch, but a few miles into the race, he vanished in front of their very eyes. Warson tripped and let out a piercing scream, but not due to pain. His friends reported seeing a look of terror on his face, unlike anything they'd ever seen, as if he saw something right in front of him that scared him to his core. Seconds later, he vanished into thin air. They searched the area extensively, got the police involved, but nothing. No trace was ever found of him ever again. That secret remains with Warson, wherever, whenever he is. And last but not least, we have our number 1 spot, Stephen Kubacki. Disappearances are never simple, but this one continues to boggle the minds of even the man who disappeared himself. In 1978, Stephen Kubacki was excited to take on the skiing trails near Lake Michigan, but when he still hadn't returned the following day, the search began. They searched for days, but the only traces they found led to one dead end after the other. The first discovery was a set of footprints where Kubacki said he was going, but they stopped right at the edge of a frozen lake, with no signs of further footprints or clues that the ice broke. Sure, it could have snowed over, but there was no little divots or anything like that. They just simply stopped. Next, they found his skis and his backpack, but no sign of the skier himself. Eventually, the search was called off, but his family held on to hope. A year later, they were rewarded when Stephen suddenly showed up at their doorstep, having little to no memory of what happened. He said earlier that day, he woke up hundreds of miles from where he disappeared in a field in Pittsfield. He was wearing clothes that weren't his, he had maps he didn't recognize, and a strange bag that also wasn't his. Stephen remained recluse and isolated after the incident and refused to undergo any offerings of hypnotic regression. Whatever happened, he had no desire whatsoever to remember it. Could it be that somehow Stephen traveled somewhere no one was supposed to go? It looks like not even Stephen will ever know.